I'm Vinny Politan. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight on Closing Arguments. Last Monday, 1 week ago tonight, I sat here and I talked about Nicole Oulson, a woman who had waited 8 years for justice. Her husband, Chad, was shot and killed in a movie theater. They were young parents. They had a 22-month-old at home, and they were out on a date, trying to get some time together. Date night. Married people can go out on dates, okay? They do, we do. And it was date night for the Oulsons, and they were out, or date day, it was a matinee, but they were getting time away and time together, adult time. And it ended up completely changing and destroying Nicole's life. She loses her husband, he's shot and killed. She's raising this child without her father. Unbelievable tragedy, and she had to live through 8 years of waiting for the day to get into court that the man who she knows, she was there, shot and killed her husband, would be brought to trial. So last week was the story of the widow of the victim of Curtis Reeves' shooting. And now 1 week later, we've got the testimony of another woman who was there on a date. Curtis Reeves' wife. She testified today. And couldn't be more different. Her life versus Nicole Oulson's life. Nicole Oulson's been by herself for the last 8 years before getting into that courtroom and getting on the witness stand. But for Vivian Reeves, she's been with her husband. He hasn't even been locked up, living their golden years together for the last 8 years. Completely different life that she's been living. Yet when I first looked at this case, I thought that the testimony of these two women may be the most important, second only perhaps to Curtis Reeves if he takes the witness stand, because they were there and they are so connected to what happened that day. Let's take a listen to the direct testimony of Curtis Reeves' wife.
First, what happens is Curtis leans forward and you hear some soft conversation.
Yes.
You don't know who spoke first, do you?
Curtis did.
And then you hear something, the word phone. That's what you described,
yes.
Something like that. Okay. And then after that, what happens?
Mr. Oulson responded in a very loud and ugly voice.
Okay, now, you don't have to say the word, but describe what he said. What did he use? The
Yes, he did.
What do you remember him saying?
He used and he's texting his daughter.
Now, once Mr. Oulson stood up, what is the next thing you observe Mr. Oulson do?
He leans towards Curtis. It seemed like his whole upper body was leaning towards Curtis.
And when you observe that motion, how did it make you feel in terms of what it looked like to you?
I thought he was coming over, and it just freaked me out. I was terrified.
You thought that Mr. Oulson was coming over the seat?
I did.
And so what happened when you saw that?
I briefly saw Curtis lean back.
Okay, let's talk about that.
Okay.
You see Mr. Oulson now leaning over the seat.
Yes.
And do you, at that point, look at your husband?
Briefly, because he moved.
And tell me what you mean. Your husband moved?
I could see that his body was moving.
Moving in which direction?
Towards the left.
Okay, and you're kind of leaning back as well. Is that what you're trying to describe here?
Yes.
Okay, so you see after your husband leans back and to his left, do you see your husband's leg at all?
I think his leg was stretched out.
His right leg?
Yes.
And do you see your husband reaching for his pistol?
I do not.
Certainly you knew that your husband probably had one, right?
He normally did, but I never even, it's not something I thought about.
Did your husband announce it to you? I'm taking my pistol or anything like that?
No.
Now, you see, once your husband leans back and stretches out his leg, do you see Mr. Oulson doing anything more to your husband?
I either closed my eyes or turned to the right.
Do you see Mr. Oulson going back over his seat then again?
No,
Do you see Mr. Oulson reaching over the seat again?
no,
Do you see Mr. Oulson grabbing the popcorn from your husband's hand?
not personally. The only place I saw that was on the video.
Okay, so when you were in the theater, did you see that?
No,
Did you see Mr. Oulson bringing back the popcorn?
no,
Did you see Mr. Oulson then move forward with it
no,
and throw it in your husband's face?
no,
Did you see the shot?
no,
Did you hear it?
yes.
What happened once you saw the shot? What did you do?
At some point, I moved a couple of seats away, but I couldn't do that until people got up and moved.
Okay. And what was your emotional state at that point?
I didn't know what happened, and I couldn't believe it. I was never been that scared before in all my life.
All happening at a movie theater. At a movie theater. And I think that, again, get back to just that fact is a tough one for the defense to deal with. But this testimony on direct, she obviously didn't see everything, but trying to help her husband there on the direct examination. Let's bring in Court TV legal correspondent Julie Janae, is joining us live from Pasco County, Florida. Julie, great to see you. That's direct examination, right? You can prepare for it. It's friendly. We're watching the defense. They can be friendly. They were. What happened on cross-examination?
Vinny, the crux of this case is whether or not the defendant in this case reasonably feared for his own life or feared serious bodily harm. And what Curtis Reeves has claimed through his attorneys is that there was some kind of an object or thing that hit him, something heavier than popcorn from Chad Oulson. But there are state witnesses who were in that theater who said they didn't notice that anything was thrown or anything was hit at the defendant. But his wife was asked that question on the stand, the person sitting next to him in that movie theater. Here's what she had to say.
You see the defendant, your husband, leaning back, correct?
Yeah,
To his
just-
left?
Just a brief glance.
All right. And you see his right leg out.
Yes, sir.
And you said you saw, at this point, you see Mr. Oulson standing,
Yes.
right? Did you ever see him hit the defendant?
No.
Did you ever hear a slap or hit? Did you hear skin on skin, something loud, like if someone had been punched?
No, sir.
Did you see him throw a phone?
No, sir.
Did you see him throw anything?
No. Really, I wish I had.
She said, I wish I had, a couple of times during this testimony. It actually drew a prosecution objection. Not sure if that meant that she wishes she had turned around, wishes that she had seen this so it would help her husband's defense. But ultimately, it's just a wish. There was a lot that she did not see and could not corroborate that only Curtis Reeves may be able to say if he takes the stand.
It's fascinating because she's right there. I mean, she's right there with her husband. Are they seated next to each other?
Yes, Curtis Reeves was sitting on her left, and she was actually behind the victim, Chad Oulson. Curtis Reeves actually had to turn a bit to have this interaction with Oulson, and he even said in his initial interview with police that he doesn't believe he would have been able to take Oulson if he had been sitting right in front of him, because he wouldn't have been able to get the shot in the way that he did.
Okay. Another big part of this case, we've got all these eyewitnesses in the theater. We've heard from them. Now we've heard from Curtis Reeves' wife. We heard from Nicole Oulson and other folks who were in the theater. But there's a video related to all of this, and we've been watching it for years, almost a decade now. There was an expert who testified today. What did this expert tell us or try to explain to the jury about this video that we don't see with our naked eyes?
Vinny, Bruce Koenig was a really good witness, really engaging. He had a lot of sort of dull moments in his testimony just because he had to get through his own background and get through the details of pixels and enhancement of video. But ultimately, it seemed like his purpose was to tell this jury that they can't simply rely on what the state has shown them from the video because there are too many problems with it. But he did have what seemed to be a good rapport with this jury. They were intently gazing at the things that he was showing them. They were looking around in their seats, lifting up sometimes. It seemed to really put a spark in this jury panel as they're listening to now 6 days of testimony. But there's a part of the video that maybe he illuminated for them. It certainly illuminated for me. We've been seeing it every time that we run that surveillance video where there is the image that's grainy there in the bottom right corner. There's the shot, and then you see what looks like rain almost coming down onto where that camera is high above what's going on. This motion sensor camera, Koenig, this expert, testified today that that's because there was a shockwave that was sent through this theater, and there's so much dust in the theater. He said they typically aren't dusted, that's what you're seeing, the reflections and the movement after that shot inside the theater. So he really did bring some perspective into this courtroom having to do with this video that is an important piece of the state's evidence.
Yeah, the first time I saw the video, I thought that was the actual popcorn that was flying, but watching it a couple times, seeing the perspective, I figured that wasn't right, and some clarification today. All right, big week today down in Pasco County. Julie Janae, thank you so much. Let's bring in our think tank tonight. Joining us in Tampa, Florida, criminal defense attorney Teresa Jean-Pierre Coy. In Los Angeles, California, the deputy public defender for Los Angeles County, Philip Dubé. And in Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey, criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor Al Wunsch III. Welcome, everyone. Teresa, let's talk about Vivian Reeves. She's there. She's right next to Curtis Reeves, but she's not able to say that a cell phone was thrown at her husband. She didn't see the leaning over. She didn't see the grabbing of the popcorn. Maybe it wasn't that vicious of an attack.
I agree with you. I mean, for her to be sitting right next to him and for her not to, I mean, I'm assuming that that the victim, stood up behind. I mean, for her not to recognize that. I mean, she knew her husband went out there to basically, see what was, try to get some help. So I just find it very unusual that she doesn't have any memory at all of such a traumatic event. I mean, her husband gets, shoots somebody right next to her. So I definitely I'm not going to say I don't believe her, but I just find it very odd that she doesn't see anything, hear anything, know anything. So it's interesting to me.
Yeah, Al Wunsch, I'll go to you on this. It's almost like Sergeant Schultz a little bit. Do you think that she knows anything that she's not saying that makes her husband look bad, or she legitimately knows nothing?
Well, first of all, Vin, happy President's Day to everybody out there. Favorite president, Vin? You have one?
Favorite? Yeah.
Yes.
The one that appointed my father to the federal bench.
And that would be?
We're not revealing it. Let's continue.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm James K. Polk. But if you take a look at the situation with regards to her testimony, I almost think she wants him convicted. I mean, she basically said she didn't see anything. That the whole crux of the case was that this guy was such a menace, that he was such a danger, that this man had to pull a gun and fire at him. And she's kind of saying, well, he spoke nasty. And I was perturbed by the situation. There's nothing there that says to me that, I was fearing for my life. I thought I was going to be dead, and my husband came to my rescue. There's nothing there at all that says that. In fact, quite the contrary. She just kind of says, yeah, then I saw him reach into his pocket. Next thing you know, there's a guy dead in front of me. Okay, and it was terrible, it was horrible, and there's dust all over the place. But that being said, this was not a good day for the defense. I mean, for the woman sitting next to him, this was not what they needed to get from her.
Philip Dubé, your thoughts about today for the defense? Because on the one hand, they're trying to tell the jury, don't look at that video. And then you've got the defendant's wife. Be very honest. It wasn't as big a deal as it was in Curtis Reeves' mind what was going on, so she didn't necessarily see everything that happened.
Yeah, I think the wife actually hurt Mr. Reeves and moved the needle in favor of the prosecution, unfortunately. You know, normally, I'm a...
Wait, why is that unfortunate?
Well, because right now I'm putting on my defense hat.
Gotcha.
Now, let me take that off for a minute. Let me just take that off for a second. On these facts, to quote Mary Poppins, he's going down like medicine without a spoonful of sugar, okay? Not to sound trite. You don't get to blow somebody away because they throw popcorn or feathers at you. Now, to be fair, it's my understanding that the victim threw a cell phone. And
well, that's the big point of contention. And that's the big point of contention. If this jury believes that there's a reasonable chance that a cell phone was thrown, is that the ticket to reasonable doubt?
Oh, the sine qua non, if you will, of self-defense with the use of lethal force under Florida law merely requires that there's imminent commission of either a forcible felony or you're trying to prevent imminent death or great bodily injury. And I got to tell you, Vinny, think tank back me on this. Somebody throws a cell phone at you or your face, that's like getting hit with a billiard ball. I mean, we're not talking about feathers now or popcorn being hurled at you. We're talking about something that could kill you, knock you out, cause great bodily injury. That is a forcible felony if believed. Unfortunately, the wife didn't see it. Now, if he gave a statement to the police and it can come in through that avenue, that's great. But I would at all costs try to avoid putting him on.
All right. We're continuing our coverage. You can watch it all day long here on your Front Row Seat to Justice, folks. When we come back.